Let's look at content infrastructure. So we're talking here about more of a high level overview of the system that you want to create. And that goes hand in hand with what John was just talking about, composability. We need to think about all these different pieces that are going to be part of our whole sort of map of where our content's going to go. And so part one of that is to try to define the content that's important to your organization. You may already have this content in certain places, or you could have it stuck in places where it's not very usable. There's no API to access it. It's in Word docs, it's in Excel docs, things like that. So how can we define what that content is? And that in itself is a whole nother webinar. We have lots of content on trying to do this, but it's certainly an exercise that you need to go through. Because what we want to do with that is we eventually want to publish it. We want to have something in place to publish that content that we've defined. And that's, to me, that's a big reason for being for a content platform like Agility is to even exist, is so that people can define and publish their content. That's a huge part of it. But then hand in hand with
Joel, one thing between that too is the previewing too, right? Like your infrastructure has to support your ability to publish accurately.
Right. Well, and I think that the idea of publish, I could have written workflow here. It's like we need to put it through all of its paces and to be able to see it. I think we talked later about testing, things like that. Really important to be able to set things up and then make sure that it's all there and kind of get it ready for the world. Because to use it in the world, we need to retrieve that content. And so a huge reason for this even existing as an infrastructure that we talk about is like we need to be able to put content somewhere and we need to be able to use it somewhere. And a lot of times folks will understand that, you know what, we need a content platform. We need to go headless because we can't retrieve our content. It's locked into our website or it's locked into these other places or some legacy system. And so part of thinking about a content infrastructure that is going to have these three kind of moments of like define it, make it ready, and then use it somewhere. But then there's a fourth one, which is trigger. So we understand like just content exists as part of a larger, sometimes we call it an ecosystem, even though it's not really alive, it kind of has a lifespan. You need to be able to potentially trigger other workflow actions that are not necessarily inside the content platform. So we can, and use something called webhooks to do that. So, we could trigger, maybe it's a DevOps workflow to trigger a build of a website, or maybe it's pushing content into something like Salesforce message templates, things like that. So these are the sort of the four really high level pieces of content infrastructure. And there's a whole another like 2,000 word blog post that I wrote as part of just this slide. But there's a lot to talk about here, John.
And it's a living entity. So just like the other sections we're going to talk, this infrastructure can be built initially, but you may want to retrieve that somewhere else or publish it in a different way, or triggers may change over time. So this changes all the time. And I think that's an important part of content architecture in general. And we do have a slide that kind of addresses that as well. It's moving. I think that's why the ecosystem word is sometimes used, because it does feel alive sometimes.
100%.